everybody. This is Bob Goodwin, founder and president of Career Club, and thanks so much for joining me for another episode of Career Club Live. Today's episode is sponsored by Next Placement, which is our innovation in the outplacement space, where we're bringing a more people-centric, empathetic approach to helping folks who are being off-boarded or when you're transitioning employees. Again, check us out at career.club, Next Placement. Very excited about today's guest. He came highly recommended by a mutual friend of ours, who we'll name in a minute. But today's guest is Sean Rugless. Sean is the founder and president of the Katalyst Group. And just to read a little bit more about that, a strategic consulting and brand development firm that develops platforms and designs engagements that enable brands and organizations to connect with their audiences. Through uncovering the client's proposition at its core, they harness insights, industry knowledge, and strategy to design outcomes and experiences that resonate. So with all of that, Sean, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much, Bob. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you. And thanks for having a well-written website. That was good. But first, I'm just really happy to have you. I mentioned that we've got a mutual friend, Bill Donabedian, who used to run the Brandemonium conferences here in Cincinnati. We're both in Cincinnati. And you came highly, highly recommended. We've gotten to know each other since, and I'm really glad that we've got the opportunity to have you today. So thank you.
Thank you. I think the connection between Bill and us is wonderful, because Bill is the type of person that created Brandemonium as a platform for brand activations and experiential marketing. And he was kind enough to actually allow me to introduce a multicultural track within that conference, which led to a series of things I've done with our clients and agencies around the world, as well as having this conversation today. So glad to be connected with you, Bob.
Yeah, and thank you for kind of telegraphing the topic here, which is going to be around multicultural marketing. And we're going to unpack that. I think that whether you are a marketer or an HR professional, this all kind of ties together. So again, I don't want to jump the gun, but thank you for mentioning the multicultural piece, because it's going to be really, really interesting. Before we do all that, though, as is our wont, we have just a couple of icebreaker questions to help people get to know you a little bit better. So easy one. Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Rochester, New York. Used to be the headquarters of Bosch, Kodak, and Xerox. So not a native Cincinnatian. I failed the high school question, which is so important here.
I'm not going to ask you the high school question. Although I do phrase it that way, like, where'd you go to school? So that can be high school or college, but I'll let you answer that as you wish.
Yeah. So I'm a native of Rochester, New York, born and raised in Western New York. My undergrad, I went to University of Buffalo, and then came back and did my MBA at the Simon Business School, University of Rochester, which was a recruiting school for Procter & Gamble. And so that is actually how I got to Cincinnati. Was I was recruited by in Fabric and Home Care, the largest business unit in P&G, and started as an assistant brand manager on Downey, got promoted to assistant brand manager on Bounce, and then got promoted to a brand manager role doing shopper marketing. So anywhere from conceptualizing products to getting them to the to shelf to consumer purchase is kind of how I what I've done. And so that's how I got to Cincinnati, and which is now the branding capital of the world.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
That's how it all happened.
Well, so you anticipated my next question. You've already started to answer it, which is just a little bit about your career. So started at Procter, and you had some nice promotions there. And then where did all that lead?
Yeah, so P&G is how I got into Cincinnati. And I think, I came from a top 20 MBA program, and, there's aspects of things that you love about business and aspects that come out that end up being your passion points. And marketing was mine. So I was fortunate enough to get my branding teeth cut at the world's largest advertiser. From P&G, I left and jumped on the other side of the table and became a brand strategist for a global design firm here locally still, working on every other brand except P&G. So I've got a lot of experience in terms of understanding then what the creative process kind of looks like, and how strategy is created and how it manifests itself into design. Left to go to work with one of my clients, which was at that time, Cincinnati was developing a brand to attract visitors, which was tourism. Yep. And so I worked with a P&G executive on loan who recruited me to the tourism group. And I consequently became the president of tourism for Cincinnati. And that cut my teeth on experiential marketing, right? Mm-hmm. So brand activations, thinking about a way to reasons to have people come to your region and spend money. And then I left there and became the president and CEO of the African American Chamber of Commerce for Northern Kentucky and Cincinnati. And so that's where I really got steeped into economic development, small business development, um, in corporate relationships. And then I got the itch for, I guess, from some of my members and started my own brand strategy and consultancy, the Katalyst Group. So a lot of good corporate experience, corporate and municipal partnerships, and then now, small to mid-tier business experience is kind of how I round up my.
No, it's great. We talk about at Career Club because we help our clients do their personal branding, and you've got a very eclectic set of experiences. But we talk about baking a cake, where you've got flour, eggs, milk. What's sugar? What should I be? And it's like, well, no, blend them together, create something really unique, and synthesize those things. And you've done just a phenomenal job with that. Last personal question. What do we find you doing, Sean, when you're not at work and helping brands activate?
Man, I wish there was a time where I wasn't working. But I enjoy music, particularly live music. I am a huge hip hop head. So the 50th year of hip hop has brought a lot of entertainment options for me. But I also I'm a bourbon enthusiast. So
you're in the right part of the country.
Yeah, exactly. So wherever I can find a good sip in a decent environment, you'll find me doing that as often as I can.
That's cool. Awesome. Well, let's jump into our topic because obviously, and I think listeners and viewers can see already that you really do have a very well-rounded background and kind of come at multicultural marketing from a number of angles. Just kind of broadly, can you help people understand what you mean by multicultural marketing, kind of what it is and maybe what it's not?
Yeah. I think it's, we'll start with what it's not because it probably surprises group. Multicultural marketing is not a utopic effort, right? It's not a company's diversity effort. It is really a business strategy. So when we think about multicultural marketing, and I'm just going to back it up for folks who are kind of in our industry in terms of marketing and advertising and folks who are not. Every brand in the world, every company in the world is looking for growth, right? And this easy way to think about this is that the only way that a company or a brand can grow is to appeal to a broader swath of consumers, right? Or people who would buy their services. And so when we start to think about then the demographic changes and shifts that are happening in the US is getting much more diverse, right? And so if a brand's growth is tied to how many people that it can attract and engage and ultimately buy its services, then in some way, shape, or form, it's in the brand's best interest to understand the insights, the motivations, and the attitudes of everybody it wants to sell to. Mm-hmm. So multicultural marketing is not just, hey, how do Black and brown people think, and should we just position our brands to appeal to them? No. All of our business growth comes from appealing to as many consumers as possible. And the ways that brands resonate is to be able to understand each of these consumer segments separately, such that there's a collective universal theme that they can find to identify a way in a territory that they can own and connect with consumers. And that's how it happens. So multicultural marketing is not a DE&I initiative. Multicultural marketing is not just the right thing to do. But multicultural marketing is the key driver to brand growth for all companies.
Yeah. So when we first were getting to know each other, I shared with you that, you talked about shopper marketing. And before starting Career Club in 2021, I was at Numerator and IRI and NPD, and Numerator's panel data. And so I was teaching Wall Streeters, hey, there's only two ways to really grow a brand at the end of the day. You either sell to more people or you sell more stuff to the same people. Those are sort of like your options. And what you're talking about is sort of that first piece of it, at least, which is, well, how do we increase household penetration? If we're selling to this group of people and there's this many people out there, how do we broaden our reach and our appeal to include more households in the brand franchise? Is that fair?
That's fair. And I think the key piece here that ends that, is what gets measured gets done. So let's talk a little bit about the measurements. If you look at any category, name it, food, cell phones, entertainment, cars, the research will say for most consulting firms that 20 to 30% of new growth comes from ethnic consumers. So that's when you think about growth, incremental growth, almost a third of that growth is coming from ethnic consumers.
Mm-hmm.
The buying power for ethnic consumers is now amassing close to 1.5 trillion, is expected to be more than $2 trillion in buying power over the next 3 or 4 years, right? And so what we're talking about then is that the pie is getting bigger. And even companies like P&G have acknowledged, they were at Black Tech Week in Cincinnati just 3 or 4 weeks ago. And what they said is they identified that 60% of the new growth that they're experiencing in their brand is coming from consumers of color. And so the key piece simply is that when we think about multicultural marketing, we're not saying, hey, let's just do some feel-good campaigns and that resonate with consumers. What we're talking about is that it's going to be essential that we position brands and experiences to resonate with the consumers that have the money to be able to purchase our products, and that's what's going to fuel our growth. The last thing I'll just share with you is P&G and some other companies did what is called a fair share assessment, right? And what that basically says is, if we can look at multicultural consumers, let's call it Black and Hispanic consumers, just to use 2 segments. And if we can get the household penetration and share levels of those ethnic consumers to equal what we have in our general market of white consumers, that actually leads to between $100 million and $500 million of new growth without inventing a new product, right? So the key piece just simply is saying is that if you want to unlock brand potential, if you want to unlock company growth, then it's not necessarily a great thing to do, and just a great thing to do in terms of embracing DEI and diversity, but it becomes a business imperative because the face of our consumer looks different today than it did 15, 20 years ago.
So I just want to underscore, bold, put an exclamation point behind what you were saying, because it's just good business. Do the math. If you have a growth imperative, everybody does, grow or die. If you've got a growth imperative, and we know that most new products fail, right? The failure rate on new product launches is in the 90s. It's not encouraging. And yet so much money gets put against innovation, not saying that you shouldn't try and innovate, but at the same time, you make a very compelling case of, if we just got our fair share against these under-indexed segments of shoppers, who have, what did you say, 1.5 trillion, going to be $2 trillion in a few years? I mean, you don't need a whole lot of 2 trillion to probably hit your growth target, even if you're Procter.
Yeah. And so what we talk about in terms of the business imperative of reaching as many consumers as possible is that we've had interactions with very large companies, P&G as an example. We've had interactions with Beam Suntory, which is the 3rd largest spirits company in the world. They make Maker's Mark, Jim Beam, obviously, Kvasse, and a couple of other spirits that we're all tasting. We work with, we went on the agency side, we've done interactions with the Katalyst Group, which is the 3rd largest agency group in the world. And now we're doing work with Kellogg's North America with 6 brands and 5 agencies. And what we're really doing, we introduced a platform and a tool called the Cultural Competency Monitor that helps brands understand whether or not they're investing behind their growth opportunity. So it's one thing to say, hey, we see this as an opportunity for business growth. It's another to say, hey, what is our footing, right? What affords us to lean forward to engage these consumers, and then where do we need to enhance our processes, our approaches to get there, right? And so what we'll be talking about today, and some of the are going to be some of the findings that we've gotten working across all those great brands and all those great companies that hopefully will begin to help your listeners and your viewers begin to develop business strategies to connect with these consumers.
Yeah. So last thing, and then we'll double click on what you just said. Again, this isn't about, well, we ought to, we should, I feel better because I am, or whatever. Right. It's just do the math. And so what I love about what you guys have is a framework for establishing, where are you now?
Yes.
And then what are the levers that you can pull that are most apt to get you to where you want to be to grow your brand, which is sort of your job.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's kind of peel the onion back then a layer. And you said, kind of establishing your footing and then understanding where you can go to drive growth. Can you break that down just a little bit more of what that looks like?
Yeah. So when we talk about establishing our footing, some people look at multicultural marketing in a lot of different ways. Now, here's the way to think about this. 1 out of 2 consumers in the U.S. will identify as ethnically diverse, right? But 9 out of 10.
I'm sorry, 1 out of 2?
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
Yep. 1 out of 2 consumers will identify as ethnically diverse. And let me double click on that since you brought that up. 10 years ago, there's a term called the census term called majority minority cities, right? Or majority minority. And that simply means that if you pick a geography, a city, a county, a state, or what have you, majority minority means that the ethnic population of that municipality or geography reaches 51% ethnic minority,
Okay.
right? So that's why they call it majority minority.
Just to be even in plainer English, non-Caucasian majority?
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly. Right. So what we're saying here is that 10 to 15 years ago, if you look at the top 40 metros in the US, maybe it was maybe 10 to 15 of the top metropolitan markets across the US were majority minority. Fast forward to now, 25 of the top 40 metropolitan markets in the US have an ethnic population that tops more than 51%.
So more than 50% of the top 40 markets in the U.S. are already ethnically diverse as measured by the census.
Absolutely. Right. And so when we start to think about this, those are consumers, those are customers. Right. And so 1 out of 2 people in the US ultimately identify as an ethnic minority. But when we look at marketing and branding agencies and marketing and media industries, 9 out of 10 people who are creating messages for them are not. So when we start to talk about multicultural marketing and trying to engage consumers, many brands and many companies are trying to get growth out of a consumer group they never had a conversation with. Mm-hmm. They don't understand the insights, the attitudes associated with authentically connecting with diverse consumers. And so therefore, some of their brand propositions don't necessarily connect, and sometimes they marginalize communities of color or LGBTQ or what other diverse segments because they're not there. And so one of the things that brands have done is to begin to start thinking about what is our footing, right? Before we start to engage in this journey, hey, do we have a way that we can understand our level of readiness to actively engage in, and engage these consumers with our marketing and branding and our agency platforms? And so that is where I see that, the smartest brands and most effective brands have done that, right? They have dissected our approach that we do is we dissect a brand's development process and we dissect an agency's creative development process. And we help you understand your level of readiness. And then we also help you understand then where some focused enhancements can come from to improve your outcome to resonate with these diverse consumers. And so I think that's really the first step is to not just jump in and say, okay, well, we got the data, we made the market case study, the business case study, let's just go. No, I think the first step is to calculate, hey, what is our footing today? And what is our level of readiness to engage in that? And then begin to start to understand where we need to enhance some things, come out with some strategies, and then execute.
So I'm sorry, I might be a little slow. What are some of the hallmarks of readiness?
So some of the hallmarks of readiness in our platform for the cultural competency monitor, we look at 5 things on the brand side and 3 things on the agency side. And we assess both. For a brand, we're looking at whether or not you prioritize this consumer segment, right? I should be looking at your brand goals. Have you done analysis on the household penetration, things that you and I just talked about? Are there gaps? But I should also see in looking at your budgets, are you investing behind your growth opportunity, right? Mm-hmm. I'm also looking at the level of diversity within the brand, right? Because if your brand, again, we talked about that statistic of 9 out of 10 people creating consumer branding and marketing campaigns that are ethnically diverse. If you happen to have diversity within your organization, that gives that creates a better opportunity for you and to embed the insight you need to be effective. So the first piece is, are you prioritizing the consumer? I should be able to look at your structure and your processes to do that. The second area we look at is alignment. That's your consumer research plan. Do you have any visibility into the attitudes, the behaviors, and the values of the consumers that we want to have a conversation with? The third area we look at is strategy. We say, okay, well, look, if I look at your brand and what it stands for and your footing, and your equity and your promise and your benefits, how do those align with the needs of the multicultural consumer, right? The third piece is the fourth piece is just looking at your brand expression, and that's just like your commercials. Do they have representation? Right. And even if they do have ethnic minorities in them, are they in context, right? Are they are you finding an in-culture moment that they can see themselves in your brand and feel as if there's a connection? So that's what we do on the brand side. On the agency side, it's much simpler. 3 stops. We want to understand whether or not the agency has what is called core competency. Do they have the ability and the research and the strategy to be able to lead the brand's thinking in this area? The second area that we stop in is whether or not they have the cultural context. So think about it. Advertising agencies, media companies, even your everyday news companies, they take insights, and their job is to manifest all what they've learned about these consumers into creative, like things you read, things you consume. And so we're looking at their ability to even do that. And the third piece is the quality of the executions. Are they able to produce brand touch points, commercials, media stories, public relations, shopper marketing activities that authentically engage these consumers? And so, again, what gets measured gets done. But my one of my mentors always said, his name was Sam Lynch, he said, you're perfectly designed for the outcome you get. So if you want to change your outcome, you have to look at how you're designing. So that's what we do. We work with brands and agencies to understand if they're designed to do this well. And if they're not, then we are in a place then to help them identify where enhancements need to be made.
Say that little pearl of wisdom again.
That pearl of wisdom was, you're perfectly designed for the outcome you get. And so if you want to change your outcome, you have to change your design.
There you go. I love that. Just as you're talking, Sean, and it seems like, particularly given the demographics that you paint a very compelling picture on, that how, by definition, multicultural marketing is mainstream marketing. It seems like it's still positioned as being niche or kind of a specialty thing. But if the demographics are what you're saying they are, this is marketing.
It is. And I think the term that we use is there's a term in branding and agency. They use the general market, and they use kind of multicultural special markets. General market generally means that you market to the middle, which traditionally is going to be white America, right? Because that's the way the brand campaigns have always used as a target, kind of the middle America, Ohio, whoever it is, and so they represent the rest of the world as it relates to consumer beliefs and all these other pieces, right? But that approach just completely ignores the demographic shifts and attitudes that we're seeing and changes in attitudes, right? Yeah. And so now what is happening as a practice is what is called total market, recognizing that the entire market is really the culmination of different segments within the market, each having a different nuance, right? And different way that they look at life and the way they enjoy life and the way that they move through life. And the brands that are most successful are the ones who are able to then understand how each segment is a little different, right? Identify a way to work across all segments such that it feels much more inclusive, dynamic, and resonates with more people. And so if you have a general market approach that just markets to the middle, then you're going to be leaving out a great swath of people that we said that had the buying power, right? Yeah. But if you have a total market approach, which is I'm going to spend my time in understanding the nuances associated with what it means to be an African American, what it means to be a U.S. Hispanic, what it means to be Asian American, what it means to be a white male, what it means to be a white female, right? And if my brand can find some great space, right, in each of those segments, the potential for growth is exponentially better than marketing just to the middle. So you bring up a really good point, Bob. It's where there needs to be a shift from just general marketing and marketing to the middle, in a place that we're all familiar and comfortable with, into recognizing that our buying power, our business opportunity, and everything else lies in the culmination of different segments. And so now what we have to do is identify propositions that work across a lot of different groups.
Yeah, well, which is sort of where my mind goes, which is how do you have enough cohesiveness around the general excuse me, brand proposition, brand image, brand equities, and yet be able to operate across many potential subsegments of the market. We have seen, in the not too distant past, brands that have very broad demographic footprints really step in it because they triple down on one segment and ended up, offending and or running off their core consumer. So that seems to be a really challenging balancing act that the brands got to engage in. How would you advise a client on that?
Yeah, so I think the piece is understanding the nuances. The magic is in understanding nuances. So let me give you a quick example, since we both have, consumer packaged goods experience, right? So let's talk about toothpaste, right? So all the work's been done in the world and research that, hey, the toothpaste offers 3 benefits that everybody wants, right? White teeth, fresh breath, right? And cavity prevention, right? I'm just using those 3 as 2 broad statements, right? If we were to say white teeth means something different across different consumer segments, and fresh breath. White teeth to some consumer segments might say this signifies health. But for other consumer segments, it might say this reinforces a positive image. You get what I'm saying?
I do.
So while we have a brand benefit that says white teeth, fresh breath, and lack of cavities, those benefits mean something different depending upon who you're talking to.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
So the key piece for brands is to really understand the due diligence and get visibility on these consumer segments, is to understand when we say these things, how does it fall on people? What is it that they are walking away with understanding? And is that true to what our brand position is, right? And so I just think that at the end of the day, there is a lot of information around the topical piece, right? In terms of white teeth, fresh breath, and cavities. No one would disagree that those things are important. But the brands that win are the ones that understand why those things are important and can go deeper into what consumers actually desire. And it differs by consumer group, right? And so if I were to develop a ad for white teeth, fresh breath, and prevention of cavities, for some, in some, it would just be an ad to talk about a fresh mouth. But for others, it might be putting on a fresh smile, right? Because that reinforces an image and something about me that I project to the rest of the world. So it's really just understanding, again, spending time and your brand plans and your investment should help you uncover what that consumer truth is, such that you can play that out in your advertising.
I think that is such a great example. It's one that everybody understands. Toothpaste, you rattle off the 3 main benefits of toothpaste. Like, and you're right. What lack of or cavity prevention means to me versus what that might mean to somebody else, or white teeth or fresh breath. I think that's really a good example. And then how do you go and live the brand out in the context that consumer segment appreciates that benefit?
And so within the model that we were talking about, the tool that I introduced to brands and to agencies, I want to understand whether or not you've invested in that research to understand those nuances. And if those nuances aren't available to you, and I don't see that you've invested to understand that, white teeth and fresh breath projected images, then that helps me understand that your level of readiness to engage certain consumers may not be there, right? And so I think that a lot of times I don't see that brands are resistant to multicultural marketing, and agencies aren't resistant to it. They just don't understand the how, right? And so what we try to do is provide a footprint and a roadmap for how to get there. And so I love your question, which was, hey, what are the different stops that a brand has to take to get there? Our conversation about the benefits of toothpaste is exactly a prime example. Dissecting it, understanding what your brand benefit is, and saying, is that elastic enough to appeal to a different consumer segments? And if the answer is, we've done the work and our research to understand these consumers better, and our brand proposition seems to be in a territory that resonates with them, then your level of readiness is higher than someone who hasn't yet done the work to understand whether or not fresh breath and white teeth is tied to image for African American or Hispanic. in which image is hugely important because of just how people flow through the US, right? It's a positive image reinforces and does so much for some consumers that they're willing to invest that. And so we're looking at whether or not your processes, your approaches uncover that for you so that the brand can use that to grow the business.
Yeah. Well, and again, what I love so much about what you're doing is it's very data-based. It's very insights-based, which, is a lot of my history. So I really love all that stuff. One of the pieces of brand readiness, though, that you talked about was the team's readiness, right? And so let's use that as a segue into the second kind of chunky piece of this that I think that you really offer a very valuable perspective on. So the understanding here is that, if we're going to really understand some of these segments of the market that represent a lot of brand growth for us, we need to understand the cultural context in which those consumers live. It's very hard to do if we don't have people on our team that can identify. Is that correct?
That's correct. So one of the things that we that I talk about in the context of why this isn't just a DEI initiative, and why this is a business imperative, is the first thing I look at. I'm going to revisit something, and it goes back to your talent discussion. The first thing that our monitor looks at is whether or not you're investing behind the opportunity, and if you're not, then you don't have the building block in place to be successful in multicultural marketing, and you may not have the building block in place to create an environment for those who have that type of insight to stay with your company. So here's what I mean by that. Understanding that household penetration and share opportunity leads to whether or not you have a share opportunity or growth opportunity, correct? And identifying that growth opportunity leads to an increased multicultural budget, right? Which then leads to an increase in diverse talent, because you want people in your organization that have the mindsets and insights and share the same space as the people you want to market to. So you increase your diverse talent, which leads to an increase in diverse creatives. Because remember, we have to manifest those insights into compelling creative ideas, which then leads to diverse producers and creators, and then diverse commercials, advertising, and everything else. And so the reason I say that the first stop is to do the business analysis is I don't recommend just hiring people because they're diverse. Because what we're ignoring is what is the skill sets and capabilities that they would bring to your business. I love the fact that if you were to do this analysis and unlock that we have a $100 million to $500 million opportunity just by resonating with a set of consumers, and then I can get someone who represents or has a closer proximity to that consumer group in my company, embedded in my processes. And research shows from Deloitte and everyone else that the more diverse your company is, particularly in the areas of leadership, your growth is much faster than a company that lacks diversity, right? So we got all these data points, but my part here simply is that a lot of this is intricately tied to the level of diverse talent that you have in your organizations, right? And one of your best strategies for multicultural marketing or business growth is to get diverse level of thinking in. And so for me, that's the connection. The connection is, hey, if we want to win among a consumer group, then we probably need to get more people that have a closer proximity, that have mindsets that are very similar, that can help us decode, understand, and engage the consumers in which we wish to expand.
Yeah, let me build on that. I'm sorry, because you're making such an important point. And we do a separate podcast called The Work Wire with the president CEO of SHRM, which is the largest HR professional association in the world. Johnny Taylor Jr. and I do one called The Work Wire. And what I've learned from Johnny is that, people thought that diversity was the goal. Well, we just need more people, who come from a diverse background. And he's like, no, that was sort of the kickoff. The goal line is inclusion.
Yes.
And so we could hire people on the brand team, as an example, or at the agency, wherever, that are diverse. So I check the box, right? We got one of those and two of those. It's like, yay. It's like, but wait a minute. Do they really have a voice? Are they able to actually influence how decisions get made? Are they able to influence the actions that we actually take? Are they able to push us to do things that are outside of general America? Because that's what I'm comfortable doing. I understand that. I've done it for 25, 30 years of doing General America. And now I've got this. The problem with diversity is you get diversity. You get people that don't think like you, that don't have the same life experiences that you do, that don't have all the same cultural context that you do. And what is a given for one person is like majorly not a given for another person. And so, diversity, yes, but it's got to include inclusion, or it's just sort of demographic box checking.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's about are you positioning someone to make a substantive contribution to what needs to happen for the business, right? The sad part is, the good and the bad is that since 2020 happened, we saw a 50% increase in the number of diverse senior leaders, right? Particularly in the area of CDOs, chief diversity officers, and things of that nature. Fast forward to 2 years later, 50% of those people are gone.
Yep.
Which means that what we had was performative inclusion or performative diversity,
Yes.
or some individuals were invited to occupy positions that their skill set, their capability, their experiences didn't satisfy, right? Or the company shifted its position and said that we're going to get a little bit, we're going to go back and be a little bit more conservative around this topic. And in either case, the thing that wins the best in that is to make sure that we are identifying individuals that can make a substantive contribution to the business, right? And giving them the environments and the context, the resources they need to be effective, period. Yeah. And that's the job of the organization. The organization's job isn't just to bring people in. The duty of the organization is to provide them with the resources to be effective.
Yes.
Right? And so let's go back to multicultural marketing. Just hiring diverse people to manage multicultural marketing is not what I'm recommending. Because remember, if we don't do that analysis and there's no budget, then whatever idea that they come up with, it's underfunded, which means it will underperform. And then the ROI that everybody's counting on won't be there because we had a marginal investment, right? Yes. And it creates a cycle that if you're not astute enough, the company will say, hey, we tried this.
We tried that. It didn't work.
And it didn't work. And we hired a diverse individual to manage it. Now, that did nothing for that diverse individual's track record, their performance, or anything. And so my piece comes in to saying it's a marriage, right? It's a marriage between an individual with the footprint, experience, and the capabilities to be able to effectively do the job, and an organization's responsibility to provide him or her with the resources, capability, and the pathway to be as effective as they can.
Okay, I'm going to throw you the world's slowest pitch, and I'm going to watch you hit it 500 feet. We've brought in diverse people. We are giving them the opportunity, resources to impact the business. Should there be, DEI, diversity, multicultural benchmarks, metrics, KPIs that we should be looking at for these folks to see if, in fact, they're making a difference?
Absolutely. And reason is what gets measured gets done. Right. If we are just if you introduce here's the funny part about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Remember what I was talking about before, it's not about, establishing a utopia, right? If you're in utopia, you're not measuring anything. It's just the goodwill and the right thing to do, right? Business strategy is always measured, which it's bewildering to me how we would introduce multicultural, diverse, equity, and inclusive concepts, but then have no measurement tied to them. And without the measurement, they're the first things that get cut because there's no performative outcome that is measured to say whether or not this was working or not. So I think that if the growth strategy of a company is going to lie in the context of its diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, it should have KPIs, right? And the other part is, and Bob, you bring up a good point. I think it's unfair to expect someone to be a Jackie Robinson and hit a home run their first time at plate. And what I mean by that is just because we brought someone that thinks differently, looks differently, and acts differently in our organization, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to then come to the home plate and automatically hit a home run. Right. I think that when we start to talk about, even when we recruit non-diverse people, some individuals have what is called a pilot period in which they're able to then innovate, explore, experiment with what works. And then when we figure out what works, then we propel that.
Yes.
And so if the mindset is we bring in a diverse person and all of a sudden things are going to change, but yet we have a behavior and a common practice that says, hey, for other people, we allow them to explore, experiment, and then we get to something and launch. Then to your point, we didn't set that person up or our organization up for success. So to answer your question, what gets measured gets done, right? And so if this is a business strategy, it should have KPIs and those type of things. But at the same time, in establishing those measurements into performance metrics, we also have to have a certain level of reasonableness with it, right? It should have some level of reasonableness such that we're making sure that it has direct ties to what it is we're here to do, direct ties to growing our business, and we're giving enough space to evolve and solve.
No, I think that's a great point that you're making. Innovation needs some room to breathe and to learn, to make some mistakes, to figure out some things. But don't let me put words in your mouth. What gets
measured gets done.
Gets done. But the KPIs are still the KPIs of the business. Remember, this isn't about utopia. It's not about it's the right thing. It's not virtue signaling to whoever's paying attention to that. The business case was this is going to grow our business. Are these efforts generating the result that we hoped? And I think you say with a small asterisk, because we're doing something new and different, it's probably not going to be purely linear until we figure out how that works here.
Exactly. Yep, that's exactly right. The thing I would share with you is we have a habit when we talk DE&I or diversity that we want to fly. We identify the one successful case study and said we did it, right? And then all the effort goes away. And so the second asterisk next to that is let's not be episodic with it.
Yes.
Let's make sure that we're talking about a sustainable approach that grows our business over time. But we also should be, in terms of those KPIs, we should also be evaluating whether or not we're adequately investing behind our growth opportunity.
Yeah.
Right. So I think you bring up I think it's a really good conversation we're having, and it's one of the components that drive strong business outcomes, particularly for multicultural marketing.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm looking at the clock here a little bit. I'm going to be mindful of your time, and we could go on for 2 more hours. Is there anything that we haven't talked about before I change topics here for half a second? Is there anything, Sean, that we haven't covered that you think would be really important for listeners to understand?
Yeah, I think the last thing I would probably say is on this piece is we have to begin to explore the willingness to both target and engage diverse consumers as well as target and engage diverse talent and bringing those in our organizations. And here's what I mean. One of the things that we're seeing right now from 2020 till now was the fact that after George Floyd happened, then everyone began to look at their moral compass. And then what we saw was a flood of investment towards things that I consider to be episodic. Right. And so there were things that probably were on the shelves, for everybody for years, but never got activated. So let's pull this off the shelf and put it out there. And what I told my group was that we would have 36 months before interest begins to sway and this goes away. So the first year is, hey, we're going to invest and try to amplify. The second year is we're going to re-up. And then the third year, we're going to sit there and say, well, what's the ROI? And start applying these different things to it. And then let that be the business case for us to fall back. And so what we're witnessing right now, particularly in marketing, is that a lot of companies are calling the question in terms of whether or not they're really positioned to lean forward to win with this consumer base, or are they going to adopt a level of conservatism because we're now starting to see people weaponize inclusive efforts. We're starting to see, as someone says, I want to focus my marketing efforts and budgets against this winning with the Hispanic consumer. There are other people that says you're not inclusive of us. And so therefore,
it's a zero-sum game. Come on, Sean.
It's a zero-sum game. But now what I'm starting to experience in multicultural marketing is, some corporations and some brands walking back their commitments. And so what we have to begin to start thinking about is, hey, what is the most effective and safe way, for brands to continue to engage, in this engagement where their growth lies. But
Yes.
I'm starting to see that some brands are willing to compromise growth because they don't know how to proceed, and they don't want to be the next Bud Light, the next.
You made such a good point. We did a different podcast on the decline of chief diversity officers, and
Yes.
the pattern that you identified is the exact same thing. And the learning for me was because those seeds were planted in rocky soil, it wasn't strategic. It was, I like your word, episodic, opportunistic, whatever the right word is. It wasn't strategic, is what it wasn't.
Right.
And so, as you said, okay, year one, we'll just put it out there. Year two, well, let's start. We have no year over year data, so we need to kind of have a second year to see what's happening. And then the third year, people pressing the pause button, and one, timeout, like that was born not the way that it should have been born. So let's reevaluate. And then to your point, unfortunately, some people are just retreating back to what's comfortable. The spotlight is off the issue. Hey, if I got to write another check to another organization, I'll do it. But yeah, anyway, can we go back to the way business was before? Because that I understand. So it's a really, really good point. And, we talk about integrated marketing sometimes.
Yeah.
You are going like full supply chain on integrated marketing, right?
Yes.
And I think that, what's going to end up happening, you heard it here first, is there's going to be smart companies that are playing a longer game.
Yes.
Who understand exactly what you're talking about. They're going to have outsized gains. By the way, who's kicking Bud Light's tail in the beer market? Modelo. Modelo is the big winner in this. Right. So, people are going to start to pay attention to the numbers, and they're going to rue the fact that they quit too soon, that they weren't committed, they didn't persevere.
Yep.
And then they're just that much further behind. Well, somebody else not only has the numbers, they have the momentum, and they've got the organizational knowledge of how to really, what the playbook looks like.
But Bob, I'm gonna tap in because the name of this show has a lot to do with career.
Yes.
Think about if you are a diverse person inside that company that quit. What does that signal to a high performing multicultural?
This is not the company for me. I got to leave.
Right. So the commitment that you made just 36 months ago isn't the same thing that you're doing now. So you got performative inclusion. If that becomes part of your culture, then your ability to retain top talent begins to suffer. Right. So what I'm leaving you with is the fact that we're now in a season, and because of the brands and the companies that we worked with, our platform has identified that there's conservatism returning. People are willing to compromise brand growth opportunities to kind of stay safe in their minds. And by walking back their commitments, they're doing two things. One, they are walking away from a consumer has a higher level of discernment today than they did yesterday around the brands that they want to invite into their lives. The second part is for the people that you brought into your organization, sends a signal that maybe I may not be as committed as I was. And so therefore the context and environment in which you are working is subject to turmoil, right? And so my thing would just simply be, in terms of as we leave this segment, would just simply be that, again, there is you're perfectly designed for the outcome you get. And the design of what we're talking about is not only just the brand and creative development process, but we're talking about how do you construct an environment that attracts the most inclusive and talented minds against your business. Yep. And if your design is that we made a commitment 36 months ago and it is now different, right? Then in some way, shape, or form, you start to go back to the outcomes that you once had before. Well,
I don't even know how to build on that, so I won't. I think that is just flawlessly said. So thank you for that. And thank you for reminding me of the title of the program. That's funny. Super quick. I always love to ask people, our guests, that because of Career Club, and this is about careers, you are in a position to be evaluating talent, whether you're helping your client evaluate talent, you're looking at the agency's talent, you're looking at your own organization's talent. What are the attributes, the characteristics that catch your eye?
Oh, wow. So the first thing is I look at whether or not someone can substantively contribute to the business or the business issue at hand, right? And so what I mean by that is I'm looking for skill set. Does an individual have the practical experience that helps us understand the level, what the learning curve would be, right? There's always going to be a learning curve when they come in. So I'm looking at substantive experience. Now, the second thing I look at is I'm not married to experience. I am married to the propensity for you to grow into what we need you to do. So even if you don't have the experience, I'm looking for whether or not there's an opportunity for us to lean into you and grow the skill sets, that we're going to need from someone in a particular position to be able to do that. So it's not that I'm married to just, did you do this or didn't you do this? Mm-hmm. I'm saying, even if you didn't do this, do you have the propensity for us to grow? And the third piece is, and I tell this to my account manager, I like to see innovation, and I want to invite you, individuals that can think and shape what it is that we do. Mm-hmm. If in our industry, in terms of marketing and advertising, it's very hierarchical, right? By the time we see a commercial, it's gone through the creative, the designers, and then it gets to a creative director, and he or she decides what moves forward, and it goes to the client, and then it goes there. So what ends up happening is it's really becomes subjective in terms of what moves forward. I really value individuals who can bring some additional thinking, broaden out the way we look at things, right? Challenge assumptions, right? But still have the business acumen to understand that we got to move some things forward. So those are the three things. I want to look at the full set of experiences that you have. Do they line up with what our needs are? Second piece is your development opportunity. I'm not expecting you to come in and hit a home run like we were just talking about, but do you have the seeds that allow us to continue to pour into you and grow into you? And the last part is, what can you bring some innovation and some strategy to broaden our thinking and our capabilities? Because every 5 years, the company has to revisit its strategy in order to grow. Yes. And so I want strategic thinkers and folks who can contribute to where we should go next.
Well, and in your role, I mean, all of that resonates. Just to comment on the last one very quickly, I think that shows a level of humility on your part that you're not the wizard. You don't have all the ideas, and I'm just sort of, moving the pieces of the chessboard around. It's like, no, we're a team. Like, I don't have all the ideas. And, one of the things that I like to talk about is I don't want to be right. I want to figure out what's right. And we do that in dialogue. And I, most value when people push back and can, defend a position. Again, we may not always go with it, but the diversity of thought, and like, I hadn't thought of it that way. And, so I really want, it resonates with me that you're encouraging people to bring ideas. Like, that's how we grow, is when you've got this.
But it's also, I mean, you've done a stint in corporations and stuff like that. We're conditioned, at least for our generation of folks who've been in companies and are doing something different. We've been conditioned to come to the table with an answer. Remember, we're sitting there. You're in a business meeting and you're meeting with your one-up or the group president or the brand's general manager, and there was the expectation that you would at least have an opinion, and then we also got trained and conditioned to do that authoritatively.
Yes.
Right. Do it with authority. When you are managing people, it's easy. I have to sound authoritative. I'm a business owner. They're paying me to know something, right?
Yeah.
But I don't want my tone to then interfere and shut someone else's thinking down.
Yeah.
So for the people that work with me and the people that work for me, I always say, I know that I have an authoritative tone or an academic or intellectual thing because our clients pay us to know.
Yeah.
But I'm letting you know, as a manager of people, that I want you to think beyond my tone and introduce new thinking. And you're inviting that. So I think it's important for people who manage people to give that invitation to the people that they work for.
Yes.
Right. As opposed to just holding a position and people kind of being a bit apprehensive about sharing their best thinking that can actually make a difference in what you do.
No, extremely good advice. Last thing. What advice would you give 28-year-old Sean with the benefit of hindsight? I got you on that one.
Oh, God. Everybody always says that, I wish I knew now. I wish I knew then what I know now. And so for me, that's my biggest thing I think about is how would I know now, like in terms of me being at this age? I think I undervalued the potential of mentorship.
Ooh.
For me, we can accelerate the pace at which we do things if we are informed about what's ahead. And I think that's the marriage between those who are more experienced and wise and those who are beginning their journeys. And so I think I would have been, I probably would have drank less. And
now we're sharing.
I would have been a little bit more outgoing in terms of just soaking in all the great thinking and not allowing a generational gap or perceived that someone is stoic and they're older and I'm not going to get anything from them. I just think that you can accelerate the pace of which you do things and make life more enjoyable if you have a lifeline to something that informs you what's coming.
Yes.
And that would have been really good for a 28-year-old, Sean Rugless. And I think that my mission is to be that for someone.
Yes.
My mission is my personal mission is to, in some way, shape, or form, I'm very spiritually grounded, to have, to take the knowledge and wisdom that God has given me and the life experiences and begin to transfer that to someone who's willing to take it. Right. So that's what I would have done. That's what I would have done.
Yes. Discipleship is a good thing. So yeah.
Absolutely.
No, I appreciate everything that you've had to say. I'm jealous of the young person that gets to be your mentee because you've got a lot of wisdom to share. So thank you for everything you shared with us today. It's been really, really powerful, and both just on the business side, but I think also on the people side.
Well, thank you for having me on this platform. What I love about your platform is it forces you to think about things that you walk by every day, but you don't apply a lot of critical thinking to. I think that I think you can accelerate the pace of impact and change by having conversations with people that are in the mix. And so when the invitation came to at least have this conversation with you, and then even our pre-show conversation, it just felt like it was a kind of an organic fit. So I'm actually very proud and honored to join the Career Club hosts that have had the opportunity to be on the show. But thank you for challenging me to think more critically about the work that we do and the impact and the change that still needs to happen. So
that means a lot to me for what you're saying. Thank you for that very much. So thank you everyone for taking a few minutes out of your day to watch this. If it's on YouTube, please comment, subscribe. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcast platform, rate and review. It really does help. But just want to sign off and say, Sean, thanks so much. It's been a ton of fun, and would really encourage people to look up the Katalyst Group if you'd like to become expert in multicultural marketing. So thank you, my friend. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I know